Commander Zethara had always imagined death would be quieter. Instead, she listened to her scout ship's hull groan like an arthritic joint as atmospheric pressure slowly crushed what remained of the port stabilizer array. The gravity generators had given up their electronic ghost 3 cycles ago, leaving her floating in a soup of her own purple blood and recycled air that tasted increasingly of burnt plastic and resignation. Her people had 17 different words for the moment when a warrior accepts their end. Zethara selected the most dignified, Veltara, the quiet closing of duty's final chapter. She pressed her primary manipulator against the family crest burned into her chest armor and began the ritual preparation for what the hegemony called the honorable conclusion, which was precisely when someone started cutting through her hull with what sounded like an industrial mining laser. "Boss, we got life signs in here," the voice carried through the metal like an excited child announcing they'd found candy. "Weak, but definitely not dead yet." Zethara's secondary eyes snapped open in confusion. Not dead yet? What kind of barbaric species discussed death in terms of timing rather than dignity? Her universal translator struggled with the crude dialect, offering 3 possible interpretations of the phrase "not dead yet," none of which made cultural sense. "Copy that, Hendricks. Get the medical kit and prep the thermal cutters. We're going full breach protocol." The cutting intensified. Sparks showered through a growing circle of molten hull plating, and Zethara realized with dawning horror that these creatures intended to extract her from her death chamber. Among civilized species, this would constitute the gravest possible violation of personal sovereignty, equivalent to forcing someone to live against their explicit spiritual choice. "Wait," she croaked through her ship's failing communication system. "I am prepared for Velthara. Please respect the honorable conclusion." The cutting stopped. Did she just say something about honor? A different voice, this one carrying the odd musical quality that suggested a female of the species. "Translator's giving me garbage." Sounded like she's trying to die with dignity or something. "Well, that's stupid. Nobody dies with dignity when we can prevent it. Dignity's for people who are alive to appreciate it." Zethara blinked all 4 eyes in sequence, a sign of profound confusion among her kind. These beings spoke of death as though it were a technical problem rather than a spiritual transition. The concept was so alien that her brain struggled to process it. The hull breach completed with a satisfying pop of decompression. A helmet-covered head peered through the opening, followed by shoulders that suggested a biped of roughly her own size. The creature wore environmental gear that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and optimistic thinking. "Hey there," the human said with the casual tone one might use to greet a neighbor. "Rough landing?" "I am dying," Zethara informed him, with what she hoped was appropriate solemnity. "Please do not interfere with Velthara." "Yeah, that's not happening." The human squeezed through the breach with surprising agility. "Hendricks, pass me the medical scanner, and tell Zhao to prep the emergency surgery bay. We've got what looks like severe internal hemorrhaging and possible neural trauma." A second human appeared in the opening, this one clutching a device that beeped insistently when pointed in Zethara's direction. "Boss, her vitals are all over the place, 3 different heart analogs, completely alien blood chemistry, and I think she's got some kind of distributed nervous system." "Can we stabilize her?" "Probably. The medical AI's already cross-referencing her physiology with the xenobiology database. Looks like she's from one of the hegemony client species. Tough as recycled steel. But they don't handle rapid decompression well." Zethara attempted to voice another protest, but found that her vocal cords had apparently joined the growing list of body parts staging a mutiny against consciousness. The humans moved around her with efficient purpose, attaching devices she didn't recognize to parts of her anatomy she hadn't realized were accessible. Listen, the first human said, his voice gentle but absolutely inflexible. I don't know what Velthara means in your culture, but around here, people don't get to die just because they want to. That's not how we operate. The absurdity of the statement struck Zethira like a physical blow. Not get to die? What kind of primitive species treated death as a privilege that could be denied, rather than a fundamental right that defined the boundary between honorable service and meaningless suffering? You cannot, she managed to whisper, force life upon the unwilling. Watch us. And with that cheerful declaration of cosmic heresy, the humans began the most aggressive medical intervention Zithara had ever witnessed. They cut away her armor with casual disregard for its ceremonial significance, pumped her full of synthetic blood that her body had no business accepting, and spoke to each other in rapid bursts of technical jargon that the translator rendered as a mixture of hope and determination. Pressures stabilizing, neural activities looking better. Think she's going to make it. Course she is. Nobody dies on my salvage run. It's bad for morale. Zethira floated in a haze of forced consciousness, watching these impossible creatures work with the kind of focused intensity her own people reserved for religious ceremonies. They treated her impending death not as a natural conclusion to be respected, but as a personal challenge to be overcome through sheer bloody-minded stubbornness. The strangest part was how normal they made it sound, as though wrestling people back from the edge of oblivion was simply what civilized beings did for each other, rather than the most fundamentally invasive act imaginable. Hendricks, call ahead to the Colony Medical Center. Tell them we're coming in hot, with a hegemony officer who needs immediate attention. Full xenobiological protocol. What about the diplomatic implications? If she's military, then we'll deal with the politics after we've kept her breathing. Politics are for living people to argue about. As they maneuvered her broken body out of the scout ship and into what appeared to be a remarkably well-commuted rescue vessel, Zethara found herself experiencing an emotion for which her language had no word. It wasn't quite gratitude. She hadn't asked to be saved. It wasn't quite anger. They seemed genuinely concerned for her welfare. It was something closer to philosophical vertigo, the dizzy sensation of discovering that everything she understood about the natural order might be completely wrong. The human colony came into view through the rescue ship's viewport, a sprawling collection of prefabricated structures and jury-rigged installations that looked like they'd been built by enthusiastic amateurs with access to heavy machinery. It should have been reassuring to see evidence of civilization, however primitive. Instead, Zethara felt a chill that had nothing to do with blood loss. If these humans treated death itself as negotiable, what other fundamental laws of existence did they consider merely suggestions? The Colony Medical Center smelled like antiseptic and someone's attempt to grow flowers in artificial soil. Zethara discovered this through her newly functional respiratory system, which the humans had apparently fixed while she wasn't paying attention. Along with her circulatory system, her neural pathways, and what her medical chart cheerfully described as 17 other critical failures that would have been fatal if we'd waited another hour. She was contemplating the philosophical implications of involuntary survival when her communication console began screaming. Commander Zethara, Admiral Crethon's image materialized with the pixelated fury that suggested he was transmitting through a military encryption array. Explain your current status immediately. Zethara glanced around the medical bay, where a human nurse was teaching what appeared to be a crystalline entity how to play some kind of card game, while monitoring both their vital signs simultaneously. I am recovering from injuries sustained during atmospheric entry, Admiral. Recovering? Crethon's crest flared yellow with confusion. Our telemetry indicated total system failure. You should have achieved Velthara 4 cycles ago. The humans intervened. The silence stretched long enough for Zethara to wonder if the transmission had failed. When Crefton spoke again, his voice carried the careful neutrality of someone trying not to start a diplomatic incident. Commander, are you saying these creatures prevented you from dying with honor? That they forced medical treatment upon you against your spiritual will? That appears to be their standard operating procedure, Admiral. By the eternal flame. Crethot's image flickered as he apparently turned to consult with someone off-screen. Commander, this constitutes the most severe violation of personal sovereignty we've encountered since the collective wars. We're preparing a formal protest to the Galactic Assembly. Zethara was about to respond when the crystalline entity at the next bed chimed in with what sounded like amused laughter. Its translator rendered the sound as pure mockery. A protest? Over humans being humans? The entity's structure shifted to a more attentive configuration. Which mythology are you working from, exactly? I beg your pardon? Crefton's diplomatic mask slipped slightly. Oh, this is rich. The crystal being's glow intensified. You think humans are sovereignty violators? My people know them as the great democratizers. They've spent the last 3 centuries liberating oppressed populations across 6 sectors. Won't let anyone stay enslaved if they can help it. The nurse looked up from her card game. Democratizers? That's a new one. Most folks around here just call us salvage specialists. Salvage specialists. A third voice joined the conversation as a biomechanical creature rolled itself closer on what Zethara could only describe as enthusiastic wheels. The Confederation records identify humans as premium mercenaries, elite combat specialists who never retreat from a contracted engagement. Mercenaries? The crystalline entity's glow shifted to a skeptical blue. The Silicon Concordat specifically lists them as pacifist mediators. They've personally resolved 14 territorial disputes in our sector without a single casualty. Zethara felt her brain attempting to process contradictory information. How can they be simultaneously mercenaries, democratizers, mediators, and sovereignty violators? Simple, said the biomechanical creature. They're whatever you need them to be at the moment. Humans don't have consistent behavior patterns like civilized species. The nurse snorted. We're plenty consistent. We just don't like seeing people suffer when we can do something about it. Define suffering, Zethara said. Death when it's preventable, oppression when it's fixable, loneliness when it's optional, pain when it's treatable. Pretty much anything that makes existence worse than it has to be. Admiral Crefton's image had gone completely still, which among Zethara's people indicated either deep thought or system crash. Commander, are you suggesting that humans oppose suffering as a general principle? Could explain the mythology confusion, mused the crystalline entity. If they automatically oppose whatever form of suffering they encounter, each species would only observe them contradicting their own worst problems. The Vorthan Empire calls them chaos agents, offered a new voice from across the medical bay. Zethara turned to see a creature that looked like someone had crossed an octopus with a filing cabinet. Every time humans show up in Vorthan space, their rigid social hierarchies start collapsing into voluntary cooperation networks. Chaos agents, the biomechanical creature sounded offended. The Machine Collective has 36 files documenting human assistance with system optimization and efficiency improvements. Both can be true, the nurse said, dealing another hand of cards with practiced ease. Social hierarchies are inefficient. We help fix them, which looks like chaos to the people who were benefiting from the inefficiency. Zethara felt a peculiar sensation, as though someone had adjusted gravity while she wasn't looking. How many species have direct contact with humans? Current count is 73 civilizations with documented human interaction, the octopus filing cabinet hybrid replied. Each one has completely different stories about what humans actually do. And they're all accurate, added the crystalline entity. That's what makes it so confusing. Humans really are everything we say they are. Admiral Krevthan's crest had progressed through several colors and was now settling into a deep purple that indicated severe philosophical distress. Commander, if this is accurate, then humans represent a level of behavioral unpredictability that defies classification. Or, Zethara said slowly, they're so predictable that they automatically respond to any situation in whatever way reduces suffering most effectively, regardless of local cultural norms. The medical bay fell silent except for the gentle hum of life support systems and the sound of cards being shuffled. Thanks, said the nurse, is probably the most accurate description of humans I've ever heard from a non-human. It's also terrifying, the biomechanical creature added. A species that automatically optimizes for reduced suffering would necessarily come into conflict with every existing power structure in the galaxy. Only the ones that depend on suffering to function, the nurse corrected. The others, we just try to help work better. Admiral Krevthan's image flickered again. Commander, we need to discuss this development. If humans are genuine anti-suffering optimizers, then your rescue represents neither torture nor sovereignty violation. It represents something else entirely. Zethara looked around the medical bay, where representatives of half a dozen species were discussing the most dangerous topic in galactic politics, while playing card games and receiving medical treatment from creatures who apparently couldn't stop themselves from helping. Admiral, she said carefully, I believe we may need to reconsider our entire approach to human contact. Agreed, but first, Commander, I need you to conduct a thorough investigation of human behavior patterns. We need to understand what we're dealing with. Investigation? Study them, Commander. Learn how they think. Because if they really are what you've described, then everything we know about interspecies relations is about to change. The communication ended, leaving Zethara alone with the most bizarre assignment of her military career: figure out why humans couldn't seem to leave well enough alone. Zethara began her research the next morning by asking Dr. Martinez what she considered the most straightforward question possible. Why do you repair things? The human paused in the middle of calibrating a bone regeneration unit, stylus hovering over her diagnostic pad like she'd been asked to explain the fundamental nature of reality, which Zethara was beginning to suspect she had. Because they're broken, Martinez said, as though this explained everything. But why does that matter to you personally? It just does? The doctor's expression suggested she was grappling with a concept too basic to require conscious thought. If something's broken and I can fix it, then not fixing it would be deliberately choosing a worse outcome over a better one. That's fundamentally irrational. Zethara made a note on her personal recording device. Define worse and better. Broken is worse than functional. Pain is worse than comfort. Dead is worse than alive. Alone is worse than connected. Martinez shrugged. These aren't complex philosophical positions. They're obvious facts. Obvious to whom? Everyone? I mean, unless you've got some kind of neurological damage that prevents you from recognizing basic preference hierarchies. The casualness with which Dr. Martinez dismissed the foundational belief systems of dozens of galactic civilizations as potential brain damage was, Zethara realized, probably worth its own research note. Her second interview was with Chief Engineer Patterson, whom she found in the colony's power generation facility, arguing with a quantum flux regulator that had apparently decided to develop opinions about its own maintenance schedule. The problem, Patterson explained while recalibrating the regulator's attitude sensors, is that most technology is designed by people who don't have to live with the consequences of their design choices. So we end up fixing everything to actually work instead of just work well enough to pass inspection. But the original designers intended for the equipment to require regular replacement, Zethara pointed out. Isn't overriding their specifications a form of technological vandalism? Patterson looked at her with the kind of patient expression usually reserved for children who'd asked why water was wet. If someone designs a machine that breaks down when it doesn't need to, they've designed it wrong. Fixing their mistakes isn't vandalism, it's basic quality control. What if the planned obsolescence serves an economic function in their society? Then their society has a stupid economic function. Zethara added casual dismissal of entire economic systems to her growing list of human behavioral patterns. Her third subject was Colony Administrator Chen, who was simultaneously managing supply logistics, mediating a dispute between two mining consortiums, and teaching a group of refugee children how to grow vegetables in hydroponic gardens. The multitasking doesn't exhaust you? Zethara asked. Why would it? They're all the same job fundamentally. Chen handed a small refugee what appeared to be a seedling that had been engineered to thrive in artificial gravity. Making sure people have what they need to be okay. Food, shelter, fair treatment, hope for tomorrow. The specific implementation details change, but the core function stays consistent. Most administrators specialize in single areas of expertise. Most administrators aren't responsible for keeping an entire colony functional. Specialization is a luxury for people who can afford to let someone else handle the parts they don't want to think about. Zethara watched Chen explain plant biology to creatures whose homeworld had never developed photosynthesis, simultaneously scheduling shift rotations on her personal communicator and approving resource allocation requests with the casual efficiency of someone who'd never considered that these might be separate activities. Do you enjoy administrative work? She asked. I enjoy results. Administration is just the tool that gets results. Like asking if I enjoy hammers when what I actually enjoy is building things. By her fourth interview, Zethara was beginning to recognize a pattern that made her deeply uncomfortable. She cornered salvage specialist Rodriguez during his lunch break, partly because she was running out of available subjects, and partly because she suspected he might be the least philosophically dangerous human on the colony. She was wrong. Here's the thing about entropy, Rodriguez said, chewing on what appeared to be a sandwich that had achieved sentience and decided to taste good anyway. The universe is constantly trying to break everything down into the most boring possible configuration. Heat death, maximum entropy, no complexity anywhere, and most species just accept that as natural law. Because it is natural law. So is gravity. But we build aircraft anyway. Rodriguez took another bite of his possibly conscious lunch. Just because something's natural doesn't mean it's optimal. Entropy wants to turn everything into uniform temperature radiation. We want to keep things interesting, so we fight entropy. By salvaging broken spacecraft. By salvaging everything. Broken ships, broken people, broken societies, broken ideas. Anything that's more complex and interesting than the heat death of the universe gets our immediate attention and our best effort to keep it functional. Zethara felt something cold settle in her primary stomach. You're describing a species-wide compulsion to oppose the fundamental direction of universal change? When you put it like that, it sounds kind of arrogant. Rodriguez grinned. But yeah, basically. The universe wants to be boring, and we want it to stay interesting. so we keep fixing things. That's impossible. Entropy always wins eventually. Maybe, but we're going to make it work for every victory. That evening, Zethara compiled her research notes and realized she was looking at something that violated every assumption about sustainable civilization that the galaxy had developed over the past million years. Humans didn't just help people because they were altruistic. They didn't fix things because they were perfectionists. They didn't fight death because they were cowards, or battle entropy because they were fools. They did all of it because they were fundamentally, obsessively, catastrophically unable to tolerate the idea that anything should be worse than it had to be. And they applied this compulsion with the systematic thoroughness of a natural force. Zethara spent 3 sleepless nights staring at her research data before the pattern clicked into place with the horrible clarity of a puzzle that had been missing its most important piece. Every alien species in the medical bay had been right about humans, simultaneously, completely. The hegemony saw them as sovereignty violators because humans couldn't respect the dignified acceptance of death, the cornerstone of hegemony philosophy. The Silicon Concordat experienced them as mediators because humans instinctively opposed conflict, which the Concordat considered the greatest inefficiency. The Vorthan Empire called them chaos agents because humans dismantled rigid hierarchies, the foundation of Vorthan social order. Each species encountered humans at the exact point where human anti-entropy behavior contradicted their civilization's primary method of managing suffering. It was elegant, it was terrifying, it was completely accidental. Administrator Chen, Zethara said when she found the human reorganizing the colony's educational curriculum to better accommodate non-carbon-based learning styles. I need to understand something about human expansion patterns. Sure, what specifically? Do you choose which regions of space to colonize based on strategic resources, territorial advantage, or proximity to trade routes? Jen looked up from a holographic display showing 17 different pedagogical approaches, arranged in what appeared to be order of effectiveness. None of those, really. We tend to go wherever people need help that nobody else is providing. Could you elaborate? Well, this system was designated for colonization after we received about 40 distress calls over 2 years from ships that had crashed or broken down in the area. No other species had established rescue operations here because the profit margins were terrible, so people were just dying unnecessarily. Zethara felt her understanding of galactic politics shift, another degree toward absolute absurdity. You established an entire colony as a rescue station? We established a colony that could support rescue operations as a side effect of making sure nobody else died out here alone. The mining and agriculture are just what pays for the medical facilities and salvage equipment. How many human colonies operate on similar principles? Chen paused, stylus hovering over a lesson plan that appeared to teach quantum mechanics through interpretive dance. All of them? I mean, why else would you put people somewhere difficult to live unless there was important work that needed doing? Zethara made her final research note. Humans colonize based on proximity to preventable suffering. That afternoon, Admiral Crefton's transmission found her in the colony's observation deck, watching human children play gravity ball with refugee younglings from 6 different species while their parents discussed resource-sharing agreements that would have taken the Galactic Assembly 3 years to negotiate. Commander, your silence has been concerning. Have you completed your investigation? Yes, Admiral. I have reached several conclusions. Proceed. Zethara took what might be her last breath as a hegemony officer. Humans are not sovereignty violators, chaos agents, mercenaries, mediators, or any other single classification. They are entropy resistors. They encounter suffering and automatically attempt to reduce it, regardless of whether that suffering serves a cultural, economic, or spiritual function for the species experiencing it. Creffin's crest flared through several colors before settling on deep orange, which indicated either profound contemplation or the onset of a migraine. Commander, if accurate, this suggests humans pose an existential threat to any civilization that depends on managed suffering for stability. Which is all of them, Admiral, including ours. Explain. The hegemony maintains social cohesion through the shared acceptance of honorable death. Humans cannot psychologically tolerate honorable death. Therefore, contact with humans inevitably challenges the philosophical foundation of hegemony society. And our options are: Zethara watched a human engineer teach a crystalline child how to repair a broken toy through patient demonstration and cheerful encouragement. We can attempt to eliminate human influence from hegemony space, which would require us to become the kind of aggressive, militaristic empire that commits the exact atrocities humans specialize in opposing. Oh, we can adapt. The silence stretched long enough for Zethara to wonder if she'd just committed treason, accidentally founded a new school of philosophy, or both. Commander, Creffin said finally, are you suggesting that the hegemony should abandon the principle of Velthara? I'm suggesting that dignity might not require death, Admiral. Perhaps it requires the choice to keep trying when things become difficult. That is a radical reinterpretation of fundamental hegemony values. Yes, Admiral, it is. Another pause, shorter this time. Commander, you are hereby promoted to Special Cultural Liaison and tasked with developing protocols for productive hegemony human interaction. Your first assignment is to prevent the diplomatic crisis your rescue has created from escalating into open conflict. Admiral, there is no diplomatic crisis. Explain. The humans don't know they've committed a sovereignty violation because they don't recognize sovereignty over self-destructive behavior as a legitimate concept. From their perspective, they performed a routine rescue operation and provided standard medical care. The crisis exists only in our interpretation of their actions. So we simply reinterpret. Zethara looked out at the colony, where humans had built a thriving community dedicated to the radical proposition that nobody should have to suffer alone. We adapt, Admiral. We learn. We choose to see human intervention not as cultural violation, but as expanded options. When the transmission ended, Zethara remained at the observation window, contemplating the strange trajectory that had brought her from certain death to uncertain but hopeful life. She had come to this system expecting to die with dignity among the stars. Instead, she'd discovered that dignity might actually lie in the stubborn refusal to let the universe have its way without a fight. The humans, she realized, had accidentally taught her something more dangerous than any military technology or political alliance. They'd taught her that giving up was optional, and now she was going to take that idea home to a galaxy that had spent millions of years learning to accept the inevitable. The universe, she suspected, was about to become a much more interesting place.